organization any longer. And learning and development will have to get extended to far more many people outside our organization than within the organization. And that's one challenge that we have, we've set for ourselves for the next 3 or 5 years on how we work with our partners, how we work with people who, are getting vested with our brand longer and longer, and build a culture with them that can, serve us in the long term. Thank you so much, and I hope some of this, was of any use to you. Cheers.
So great. Good afternoon. Am I audible to everyone? Okay. So building up from really what Tarun spoke about the emerging trends and what his organization is doing, let me just take a step back, and before I talk about the trends, the emerging trends in learning, let me just talk briefly about the patterns, that the industry has been seeing in the last decade or so, which are leading us to these trends. So to begin with, let me introduce you to the new learner. Tarun talked about it, the millennium. By the year 2020, which is just about 4 years away, 70% of the workforce in India will consist of millennials. And these are people who are restless, who are modern thinkers. They're overwhelmed. They're distracted. They like to learn in a different fashion. They believe in receiving and taking feedback. They're very interactive in nature. So the landscape already has changed in the last 5 years, and it will continue to change. So that's one pattern that constantly will decide where the L&D strategies move. Secondly, there will be a reduction in availability of talent in time to come. So by the year 2020 again, there'll be close to 7 million excess of talent in India, wherein other countries like Europe, Japan, etc., will probably have a deficit. So that's a great opportunity for India to move their talent. But in the same breath, just imagine the demographic disaster it's going to be if this workforce is not trained and skilled at the right time. So that's something that collectively the L&D industry, which is of course going through a transformation, needs to think and put their thoughts around. Also, when it comes to learning curve, both for individuals and organization, there is a need for steeper learning curves, at a much lesser cost. So while there was time then, when onboarding was about, 3 months of time, today companies, like Tarun mentioned, do learning even before they hire people. So they're much steeper learning curves. They want people to be on the job much faster. And this millennium, which is about, average age of about 29-year-olds, they, in their own personal capacity, also want to learn faster, move on with their jobs, just-in-time learning and so on. And how all this is being possible? Obviously with the help of affordable technology, which is much easier to use. There is constant research, constant development being done in this area, which is helping large organizations, even to a large extent mid-sized organizations, adapt to these newer trends. So what are these new trends? Both my earlier speakers did speak about it at length. We were depending on conventional e-learning, which is now being taken over by something called branched learning scenarios, wherein a learner moves into a branched learning and plays around with simulation. There is gamification, there is e-learning automation, which so learning management system today are so advanced that they help you understand each learner's learning pattern, and that's how they assess their learning abilities. Role plays are being replaced by gamification. There is, on the job is, now taken on by just-in-time learning. This is very relevant for the 25 to 29-year-olds who just want to learn fast snippets of information, but of course, to make sure this is really relevant for them. So while many organizations are seeing huge benefit, which are around cost saving, these trends are easy to individualize, they're helping companies drive a cultural change much faster. There remains a big challenge which is yet to be addressed. So the challenge is that despite the fact that all leaders, and everybody sitting in the panel here agrees that the traditional form of learning would not suffice, for the workforce that's going to be joining in time to come, the L&D spend, more than 50% of L&D spend is still in the traditional form of learning, and it's like a vicious circle, So on one end, we're taking our learners into a classroom, we're spoon feeding them, we're downloading information to them and hoping that they will go back and, make use of this in their day-to-day life. We're at the same time killing their self-learning skills, the self-motivation skill, which is what's really a challenge and a vicious circle for corporates. There are organizations who do embrace the e-learning, or technology-enabled learning services, but at the same time they're failing, or the initiatives are failing. And I think our panelists in the beginning of the session, Prabir and Anand, also spoke about it, is because the organizations are not able to tap the learning style of a learner. That's really what's missing in the whole cycle. And when each individual learning style is different, a standard technology-enabled learning would, may not also suffice. This kind of newer trends are also at the same time, seen very intrusive, because you're constantly monitoring the growth and the learning pattern. And not all organizations today feel they're capable of handling the data crunching that happens, post the learning sessions that have happened. Newer competencies need to be built, to be able to handle the dynamic learning environment. And going back to the point I raised about this vicious cycle, so I will leave this discussion open to the panel and to the audience that, really what are the ways in which we can get ourselves out of this cycle of continuing to invest in, traditional form of learning while, embracing our arms to the newer learning trends and emerging trends in learning. Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends. I just said good afternoon, friends. So sounds better. Sounds better. Chairman, sir, with your permission, I'm going to digress a little bit from emerging. I want to put context to learning. Because hows and whats can be learned in probably conferences like this. But context, which is philosophy, has to be part of your DNA of the organization. It's a philosophy. In philosophy, you subscribe to it. In agenda, you comply with it. Subscription comes from here. Compliance comes from here. So if you subscribe to it, you say that we are like this. And we don't say that because XYZ organization has best-in-class learning, we will be like that and try to kind of bring in that and comply with that. That's, for me, is completely dysfunctional learning and development programs in the organization. But before I go there, I just want to, with your permission, sir, talk about the context that has changed. When I went to campus and went to my first job versus today's, and Tarun talked about millennials, what has changed? So much has changed. But I think fundamentally one thing changed in parlance of HR is people needed organizations. Today organizations need people. That's a very, very powerful syndrome that got changed in context of HR. Therefore, the way we manage people has undergone 360 degrees. And I think that's how the learning also needs to change. It cannot remain typical ROI-driven learning. Because the moment you use the word ROI, it becomes measurable and it becomes outcomes driven. Then it's not a philosophy. then you are saying I'm investing so much, therefore I must get so much out of the particular effort. Commercially sounds damn good. And therefore I said, as a qualifying statement I made, is it your philosophy? Then it better be embedded in everything that you'll do in the organization. Am I making sense? Because for years together, and we've seen this being discussed, is we get to conferences like this, we learn something new that somebody else is doing, try and implement that back in our home, and it doesn't work. Because the philosophy in that organization is entirely different. A lot of organizations still believe that learning and development is HR agenda no more. It's a leadership agenda. It's a CEO's agenda. It's not an HR agenda, because if coming to work is part of everyone's responsibility and engaging them at work is everyone's responsibility, then it better be everyone's responsibility to get people learned at workplace so that they become holistic. Because when it's outcome driven, it becomes like our education system. Our education system is completely outcome driven. And I'm willing to get challenged on this. Parents send their children to a particular program because that program will enable them to get to A-class organization, and therefore they will get comforts of life and that kind of compensation. In the process, all those years and efforts the child does is just to get to that outcome. And there is nothing holistic happens in his or her case. And that's my fundamental issue. And whenever you achieve outcomes, the intent of that learning gets dropped because you achieved the outcome. And where is the holistic development in this? There's nothing holistic about it. And therefore, I think this context that has changed needs to be completely recognized, factored in whatever you do in the organization. Learning is one of the agenda of the organization. Like making profits is agenda of the organization, learning has to be up there in the boardroom. If it is a philosophy. If it is not, if it is HR's agenda, then you allocate 1 crore, and at the end of 1 year, you ask him how much you invested in that, what was your, and how much the returns you got, because you will have all the KRA sheets in front of you, which will tell you that last year you had 18% high pots, this time you have 23% high pots. So 5% growth has happened because of a learning initiative bullshit. It's not happened. Because I don't want to get into this because at the end of your high pots selection is this rigmarole or a beaten down process called as PMS, which when the conversation happens, immediately before that and after that people laugh about. And then everything is given that kind of importance to derive learning out of that is, I don't think, serves any purpose to organization. It has not, it will not. And therefore, if it is not part of your DNA, if it is not part of your philosophy, if it is not part of your day-to-day life, a learning agenda is bound to fail. And last thing I want to tell you is that in today's economic model, which is market economy and products are the differentiator, we have gone beyond that. Today, experience economy is an experience economy. Consumers experience your products and services, and that gets them back to you to buy that product or enjoy that service or use your services. So if that experience wants to be fulfilling to the consumer, then every employee, right from the peon to managing director, has to have a learning agenda which is embedded into their day-to-day life, because experience is ongoing for a consumer as and when he uses It's not 8 hours that he has only experienced. He's experiencing 24 by 7, 365 days. And if you're